All right, YouTube, it's Fukushima time again. I know that there have been continuous updates on my channel on the situation, but today was an eventful day at Fukushima, and it's still going on right now. A fairly large earthquake, a 7.1 or 7.3, depending on what source you cite, uh, earthquake struck fairly close to Fukushima. It actually did cause a tsunami, only the tsunami was about 3 feet tall, so it didn't really do any damage. There was shaking on the live cam, and on ENE News, you can actually see that if you go there, and I'll put a link just to the site there. It should be the top story. If this earthquake had struck closer to the plant probably wouldn't be there right now. It would be a line of craters. Because it also came out not that long ago, actually, I think it was 2 days ago, that Unit 4, the one that contains all of the fuel rods that everyone's worried about, has been given a 0 rating as far as its earthquake preparedness, which means that even a moderate earthquake with an epicenter close to Fukushima could theoretically collapse the building. This makes sense because when you look at Unit 4, it looks very spiffy and clean. That's because they built essentially a skeleton around it on which is a framework on which they've mounted the crane that's going to be taking the fuel rods out of the pool. The building itself inside that shell is still largely collapsed and dilapidated. And the whole area, let's face it, is completely radioactive, so there's and filled with seawater, so there's degradation going on continuously in all of these buildings, including the two reactors that they wanted to restart that sustained some damage even though they didn't collapse. This quake is being blamed essentially as an aftershock of the quake that hit in 2011. It's possible, and there were several smaller aftershocks afterwards. What's not clear is whether this quake, which would have been felt more weakly at the site because it was offshore, I think it was 200 miles offshore roughly. What's not clear is whether any damage was sustained on site. You're probably not going to hear anything about that because right now TEPCO is already worried about Typhoon Francisco hitting about 6 to 12 hours from now. By the time you wake up in the morning, Francisco will probably be about right over Fukushima. It is tracking directly towards it. It is still a powerful tropical storm. It may very well interact with Hurricane Lekima, which I think is a Category 3 still. And if that happens, then Francisco might be more powerful than even a tropical storm. It might absorb some strength from it. So right now, TEPCO is probably directing most of its workers to the goal of pumping water in preparation for a very, very strong drenching rain. And even then, you can expect radiation to spike at the site because it does after even a small rainstorm. So if you think they have a lot of people looking around for quake damage, you're joking with yourself because they can't possibly spare that manpower. It came out also yesterday. Workers are alleging that basically TEPCO is advertising, high pay and there's no real danger, and then gets these people to sign the forms, and then they send them in there to be expendable grunts for a few days or weeks, and then sends them home while skimming their pay. You've got to understand, most of these workers, the TEPCO considers them completely expendable. They have no real reason beyond nationalistic honor, which, let's face it, with such a low morale at the site probably doesn't exist there among the little guy workers, to keep them actually working at their peak. TEPCO has mismanaged this site so badly that if this ethos that TEPCO uses, with continuous mistakes that are almost humorous in how stupid they are, if you applied it to any normal business, it would be an episode of The Office. That would be what you'd be watching. It would literally be humorous if there weren't such risk involved, both to the workers themselves, even the higher-ups that are managing the site, they're still getting dosed with radiation. If it weren't so risky, all the things that they're doing there, it would be funny. The fact that there's so much, plutonium and uranium and all of these wonderful isotopes and melted down coriums and Radioactive ruins on site, of course, keeps it from actually being funny. Unless your idea of funny is, yes, it collapses and the northern hemisphere gets a good old dose, the same as they did back in the 1950s during weapons testing, which you can argue over the health implications of that as well. Unfortunately, this rather large earthquake, because let's face it, if it's over 7.0, it's a large quake, capable of doing significant damage. Even the fact that it was located offshore and the vibrations were less strong at the Fukushima site itself doesn't prevent the possibility that damage, or at least some sort of injury, was done to these buildings. You've got shaking going on. These buildings are already ruined. Unit 4 is a ruin right now. Only the skeleton outside of the building looks halfway structurally sound. They've had to prop up the building on the inside with supports just to keep it from tipping over. You watch the video of the shaking, and if you pay close attention to the stack that's in the foreground, the big, tall, almost Eiffel Tower-looking chimney that used to vent steam out of the reactor, you can see it swaying back and forth. And it's already got cracked braces. Every little vibration at that site just brings things one step closer to the possibility of a collapse, which is something that people don't realize. They see, well, it's sat there for 2 years, more or less, 2.5 years now. And it hasn't, nothing's really happened there. There's been some steam coming out, and then that chimney measured 10 sieverts per hour, so, if a worker was up there, they'd be dead within minutes. But people look at the site and they say nothing's really changed. But if they've been paying attention to the news on the site, they've seen the radiation over the last few months has steadily increased. Lately, it's increased dramatically to the point where some of this waste that's being driven off site by these typhoons is highly radioactive. If you were to ingest even a small amount of this matter, this basically silty wash that's coming out from the drainage on this plant, you probably would get cancer. It's that radioactive. They're measuring it in the tens of millions of becquerels per liter, I believe, at this particular drainage ditch. It's a very large amount, much more than in the storage tanks that have been partially filtered. But this earthquake does have the potential to have done some damage to the plant. The thing is, because TEPCO is so intent on focusing on Typhoon Francisco right now, they don't really have the manpower to check things out properly. They do have many, many workers on this site. The problem is that a lot of these people don't have proper training. Remember when they were using Geiger counters that only counted up to a certain amount, which was very low, and it turned out that they weren't sufficient, and it was actually a much higher reading around these tanks. They're not properly equipped. They're not properly trained. Their morale is low. They're coming in hungover. And ultimately, what could happen is that through workers not knowing what they're supposed to be doing, you could have a disaster occur at this site. So TEPCO swears that TEPCO already came out and said, well, we don't expect there to be any real damage to the site. It was only a 7.1 or a 7.3 earthquake. It's not going to cause any damage. That's not clear. Right now, and if you look at the live feed right now, all you see is drenching rain and some decent wind coming down. I've got the live feed open right now with a bunch of cranes and that ever-present stack right in front, which is still teetering to the side. They haven't done anything to it to stabilize it, probably because they can't get close enough to do so. There's a crane line swinging back and forth wildly right in the foreground that's making me nervous. This site is really being managed into decay. I've already pointed that out. The TEPCO, what the hell are they going to do about the coriums? Are they going to go in with the, demolish the building and try to extract it from the ground? It's not going to happen. That would be like trying to walk into Chernobyl and grab the elephant's foot and, put it on a wagon and cart it out the front door. It's not going to happen. The problem is that everything that happens at this site, every drop of seawater, every typhoon, every aftershock or earthquake or little seismic event, anything that happens here, number one, degrades the site further. And number two, has the possibility Remote, yes, but still there, of causing a major disaster. People can go back and forth all day about, well, if Unit 4 collapses, well, will it be an earth-shaking destructive event, or will it be, business as normal? You can debate all day about how bad it will be. The thing is, the possibility of it happening is still there. It is possible that it will happen. Right now, there's rain on site. It's only going to get worse over the next 12 hours. If Hurricane Lekima keeps tracking basically on the course it's expected to take, it's going to block Hurricane Francisco from actually moving and stall it out right over Fukushima, or between Tokyo and Fukushima. That would be the worst case scenario when they've literally run out of storage room in these tanks. They're going to pump this material underground into tanks down there. What happens if they run out of room there? Water is just going to build up onto that site like a motherfucker, and it's going to flood the site. Have you ever seen quicksand? Soil or sand or silt that's been inundated and turned into a sort of putty by water. It's a very sticky mess, and trying to put something in it to keep it stable requires a great deal of effort. The problem being, there are already suggestions that some of the soil underneath this plant has already liquefied to that degree. It has already become essentially quicksand. Um, and while a person may be able to get out of quicksand if they're thinking clearly, because it does suck you down, but you can still get out of it. It doesn't drown you, by the way. Most people would just get stuck and then die of exposure. You don't actually sink down into it, go down 100 feet under the ground or anything. Buildings can't do that. Unit 4 can't magically move itself out of the way of liquefied soil. So if the soil liquefies beneath Unit 4 and it starts sinking, and the skeleton does or doesn't start sinking, it's going to collapse anyway, which is something that people on the site don't seem to be taking seriously. TEPCO is literally like watching reruns of The Office. Only this time, when they make a mistake, people's lives are in danger. So that's about the long and short of it. There was a quake today. I'll put ENE News in the description. You can look up the quake yourself. It's on CNN right now, so just go to CNN and it's one of the top stories. But again, the mainstream media put it on page 2 like they always do. So it's concerning, apparently not too concerning to people who have a great deal of money and know they can move to Argentina if things go wrong.